Passerine, Chapter 2. Like Caroline Bells, the House of Augustus rings. Wilbur did not know what to make of the visitor. The traveler, whatever he was. Father had come down to the garden with him, and Wilbur could tell he was sad. He didn't know if the visitor had been the cause or something else. Someone else. A formal introduction is in order, Father had told Wilbur and Tommy. This is Technoblade, an old friend. He will be tutoring you for a while, Wilbur. Wilbur had stared up at the man, seeing him in the soft morning light. At last, Technoblade. Tommy was right. It was a pretty dumb name, and one Wilbur had heard before, though he wasn't sure where. He was tall and lean, and most likely a few years older than Wilbur. He was dressed like him too, with poofy sleeves that Tommy always said made him look like an old man. An emerald earring hung from Technoblade's left ear, similar to the one that Father wore on a gold chain around his neck, tucked secretly under his dress shirt. Was he some sort of royalty too then? Some foreign prince or a distant cousin that Father never bothered to tell Wilbur about. Father kept many secrets. This may just be one of a million. Technoblade had taken one look at Wilbur, nodded, and then said, "We'll start at dawn," before leaving them. Wilbur had stared after him. What? Father had struggled to keep a smile off his face. That's Techno for you. Now they were sitting in the dining hall, each to their own thoughts, except Tommy, whose thoughts must always come out of his mouth regardless of who was
Game over.
or wasn't listening. And Wilbur tripped me. I got up very quickly. You saw that, didn't you, Dad? Dad, didn't you? I saw, Father said distractedly. He was staring down at his half-eaten plate as if it held the secret of the universe. Wilbur assumed he was only doing it so he wouldn't be staring at Mother's empty seat. She'd been taking more and more of her meals to their bedroom. Tommy hadn't noticed yet, but Wilbur did. Wilbur always did. And this Techno fellow, he's a bit of an odd one, isn't he, Will? Will he be training me too? Will I have to wake up at dawn like Wilbur? Wilbur grimaced. Please don't remind me, Tommy. Tommy stuck his tongue out at him from across the table. It's not like you have any other plans. I'm sure you'll just be staying up reading again. He gestured dramatically to himself. I, for one, would love to be under the tutelage of Mr. Technoblade, stupid as his name may be. The two of them turned to their father, one with starry-eyed expectation, the other with morbid curiosity. Father sighed fondly before ruffling Tommy's hair. Sorry, little bud. Maybe we can find someone else for you. I'm sure the captain will be willing to. But I want the blade, Tommy whined. Wilbur snorted. Yeah, as if you could even wake up early enough. You'll still be in bed by noon. I can see it now. Father gave Wilbur a cheeky grin. He only reserved for his eldest son. Tell you what, Tommy, if you can wake up with Wilbur, then you can watch him train with Techno. Truly? Tommy kicked back from the table, nearly upsetting Father's glass of wine. "Good night, then. Early to bed, early to the prize, as they always say." "Who says that?" Wilbur said, but Tommy had already gone off, leaving Wilbur with their father in silence. For a while, the only sound were utensils scraping against the plates and Wilbur's heartbeat in his ears. He would never admit it to Tommy or anyone, but his relationship with father had always been better with his brother around. It wasn't that Wilbur didn't love his father, or that he thought his father didn't love him. Wilbur couldn't remember it happening, but somewhere along the way of studying warfare and politics, of staring up at the throne that would one day be his, of learning how to be a prince, he'd forgotten how to be a son. And sometimes when father thought he couldn't see, father would look at him with a bottomless grief, like he was mourning something already lost. It should be Tommy, Wilbur had thought. Sunny Tommy, who managed to charm everyone he met, in spite of, or perhaps because of, his loud disposition. Not him, not when father looked at him that way. Wilbur swallowed the last of his dinner, and was set to go, if not for his father speaking once more. "Wilbur?" "Yes, father?" Father leaned against his hand as he considered Wilbur. "Do you want me to be there for you tomorrow?" Wilbur scoffed half-heartedly. "I'm not a child, father." "Of course," father said, "but Technoblade is still a stranger to you." Wilbur pursed his lips as he thought about his father's words. "Do you trust him?" "Yes," father replied at once. Wilbur nodded. "Then I trust him." Father stared at him for a long minute, then nodded. There was nothing else to say, it seemed, and so Wilbur left, leaving his father to the quiet. Tommy's door was firmly shut by the time Wilbur arrived at their sleeping quarters. Wilbur's own door stood ajar, waiting. Moonlight spilled from the arched windows, painting everything in silver. The bed littered with half-finished books, and the desk bearing scars from Wilbur's manifold frustration, and writing music for the guitar that he sat discarded on the floor. Mother had given him that guitar for his 10th birthday. He used to play lullabies or spooky songs when he was in the mood for older brother mischief for Tommy, before Tommy decided he was a big man and moved to the bedroom across the hall. His body felt heavy with thoughts. Technoblade, the boy who looked not much older than him, now tasked at tutoring him. At what? Father had not been forthcoming with that, amongst other things. With a sigh, Wilbur grabbed the guitar from the floor and dragged it with him to the window. As he plucked idly at the strings, he gazed out at the horizon beyond the glass. The sprawling lawns of the castle ending at the foreboding gates, and then after that his kingdom, his birthright. He played a single discordant chord. Nothing had come easily to him recently. Music, literature, conversation, everything, all at once had been taxing. Even laughing with his brother felt like a chore. Wilbur's fingers settled on what was undoubtedly going to be another bad note. Something was moving down on the lawn. He squinted at the figure until it came into sharp focus. Technoblade? Wilbur pressed his face closer to the glass, just to make sure his eyes had not deceived him. There were many people in the kingdom with pink hair, but perhaps fewer who also moved with lethal grace of a python. Technoblade walked across the lawn and disappeared past the gate without a glance back Wasn't until his breath fogged up the window completely that Wilbur realized he was hyperventilating. He pulled away from the glass and stumbled over his guitar on his way to the bed. He pulled the covers over him as if darkness would dampen his thought. Where is he going? Followed by Will he come back? Will he come back? You're late. Wilbur blinked in the dim sunlight, barely breaking the horizon. What? He blinked some more until he finally recognized the surrounding. The smooth marble floor, the 4 columns sculpted like gods, bearing up the flat roof, ivy following over the roof's edge, like a waterfall, curtaining them off from the rest of the garden. This was the training pavilion, Father's personal training area, where he attempted to teach Wilbur fencing before it became clear that weaponry was not Wilbur's forte. It's all right, son, Father had said carefully, tending to the cut on Wilbur's leg from his own rapier. Kings don't really need to know how to fight. That's what armies are for. Father had sounded angry as he said this, but Wilbur somehow knew it wasn't because of him. But you know how? Wilbur had pouted, doubtfully, trying to hold back tears as Father applied stinging herbs to his wound. Well, said Father, that's different. Different how? Just different. Father finished tying the bandages around Wilbur's leg and smiled at him. I'll tell you when you're older. He never had. But it wasn't Father standing before Wilbur today. Well, Technoblade said, gesturing to him, to the heavy chest in the corner. We're burning daylight here, little prince. Hurry up. Wilbur blinked. Sorry, but how did I? Technoblade stared at him quietly as they both waited for Wilbur to finish his sentence. His eyes are red, Wilbur noted distantly, even as he struggled to remember anything else. He could not recall falling asleep or waking up or walking down to meet his tutor for their first lesson. Well, Technoblade potted. Wilbur shook his head. Nothing. What are we, learning today? Technoblade cocked his head to the side, unimpressed. His hair had been pulled into a braid so tightly that it hurt Wilbur's skull by proxy. Philza said you're a crap at fencing. Wilbur grimaced as he walked over to the chest, kneeling to filter through it. Its content. That's one way of saying it. He picked up one of his sword and turned to Technoblade, who apparently brought his own weapon, a wicked-looking broadsword with ruby-encrusted hilt. I'm a bit better with long-range weapons, if you were wondering. I wasn't. Technoblade snorted. Get into position. Wilbur did. That's not correct. Wilbur sighed. I told you. Technoblade walked closer to Wilbur until they were eye to eye. Wilbur was a few inches taller than him. He realized, at least until Technoblade knocked him flat on his back. With a sudden blow to the stomach, the air left Wilbur's lungs in a rush. He blinked lazily up at the ceiling for a moment before the indication set in. He leaned himself against his elbow and glared at his tutor, who was looking more and more unimpressed. You could have withstood that if you were in correct position, Technoblade drawled. You could have warned me, Wilbur spat, clambering to his feet. Oh, is that how a fight goes, your highness? Technoblade mocked. All right, then if it pleases you, your princeliness, I shall be striking your shoulder with the flat of my blade next. What? Quicker than a breath, Technoblade did just that. Wilbur landed on his side, his own weapon flying out of his hand. Technoblade laughed with no real warmth. I even warned you that time, and I still knocked you over. Gods, you're pathetic. Wilbur wanted to say, I'm calling my father, but caught himself before he could give that ammunition. to the smug bastard. Instead, he got shakily to his feet, his entire body smarting from the impact with the floor, and picked up his rapier up from the ground. He got into position again. Technoblade raised one eyebrow. This would go faster if you told me what's wrong with it, Wilbur grumbled. This would go even faster if you didn't fumble your basics, Technoblade retorted. Shut up. Strong demands from a boy who can't even get his left foot placed properly. Wilbur considered his words. He moved his left foot inch by inch, watching Technoblade until the man finally gave a curt nod. Wilbur sighed. See, that wasn't... Oh my gods, Wilbur barely had time to throw up his rapier before Technoblade crashed his sword against it. Steel hissed. Wilbur's knees buckled under Technoblade's surprising strength. It felt like having an entire house collapse on him, and if he fell, he'd be crushed. Technoblade fell back, leaving Wilbur with his heart hammering in his chest. What was that? Wilbur demanded. You could have killed me that time. I could have killed you multiple times since you first walked in here. Technoblade gestured for him to get into position again. Again. Never let your guard down, Your Highness. Always assume the enemy is planning to strike. What even is the point of this? Wilbur asked. The kingdom has been at peace for God knows how long. I don't need to risk my neck for a skill that doesn't matter. Even matter. Technoblade considered him for a long moment, the silence between them only broken by beginning of bird song, as the rest of the world began to awake. And what will you do even if it does matter? Technoblade asked. It never will. But let's say it will, Technoblade interrupted, taking a step towards Wilbur, his red eyes never once leaving the prince's face. Let's say, hypothetically, that a foreign army attacks at this very moment. Your father isn't here to help. Nobody's here to help. It's just you. Do you just stand there and get torn apart by the mob? Will you run like a coward and leave your kingdom to the wolves? Wilbur flinched. That's not... Or not even an army. Consider, if you will, just one smart, very angry person, and they've got your brother. Technoblade smirked at whatever expression was on Wilbur's face. That's all it takes, you know, to kill a kingdom. A single person knows your weak spot. So what you need to do is get rid of them, the weak spots. I mean, this kingdom is only impenetrable because Filza has long ago gotten rid of every vulnerability. So what happens when you take the throne? That's not true, Wilbur said quietly, standing in the downpour of Technoblade's words. My father, he does have vulnerabilities. Me, he has my mother. He has mother, Tommy. Me. But he has the power to protect them, Technoblade replied. And you don't. That's the difference. The sun had climbed higher into the sky, painting everything in gold. Through the gaps in the ivy, the warm light shone on Wilbur's skin, warming him from the inside out. He imagined the light seeping onto his skin, into his bones, into the cracks of his soul, until he could be made whole again. A boy of sunlight, like Tommy. He wanted the sun to burn away the tiredness, the sadness, the thoughts. He wanted the sun to burn Technoblade, too, with his harsh words made harsher by their truth. Wilbur took a shaky breath, letting the fresh air in and trapping it in his lungs for as long as he could. Then he let it out. He glared at Technoblade, then got into position. Fine, he spat. Do your worst. Wilby, you look like trash, Tommy said brightly over a plate of eggs. Tommy, Father scolded, No, Technoblade mumbled through a mouthful of meat. The boy is right, Phil. Wilby does look like trash. Wilbur groaned at their remarks, and then groaned some more when the movement made his ribs feel like they were cracking apart. Bruises were already starting to form up and down his arms from various times Technoblade had knocked him to the floor. He couldn't even reach his utensils without pain lacing up his side, and so his breakfast remained tantalizing out of reach, right in front of him. Tommy's initial annoyance at sleeping in and missing the blade in action was only matched by his absolute delight at seeing his older brother so battered, and then exceeded by his excitement when Father invited Technoblade for breakfast to recount how terribly Wilbur had performed. It was to track his progress, or some sort of excuse like that, though Wilbur guessed Father just wanted to stop Technoblade from disappearing wherever he goes off to, like last night. Did he cry? Tommy demanded, partially vibrating off his chair. Technoblade seated himself, cut another piece of meat, and chewed ponderously on it before answering. Almost. Wicked, Tommy breathed. Father glanced at Wilbur worriedly, talking in his bruises. Techno, maybe next time you can go easy a bit. No, Wilbur said hurriedly, wincing. Then his sore limbs protested. No, I told him to not hold back. Father raised an eyebrow. I doubt that. No, really, I need this, Father, Wilbur insisted. His legs felt like lead, and some of his bones were definitely misplaced. But by the end of their 5-hour session, he learned where to strike to kill, where to strike and incapacitate, how to block attacks as much as deal them, and how to fight off stronger opponents. Which, for you, would be all of them, Technoblade had said as he righted Wilbur's grip on his rapier. Let the boy bruise a little, Phil, Technoblade said, now downing a glass of wine. It's good practice, good demonstration. Distraction, too. Distraction. Wilbur looked at his father, but he was busy trying to force a bowl of vegetables on Tommy. When he looked again, Wilbur found himself meeting eyes with Technoblade. The boy was considering him at length. Wilbur had caught sight of that expression multiple times in the past 5 hours, like Technoblade was inspecting him, less with the certitude of a teacher and more with the intense focus of a surgeon, trying not to make the wrong cut. What? Wilbur finally asked. Do I have something on my face? Yes, defeat. Wilbur resisted the urge to stick his tongue out like Tommy undoubtedly would have done. You're a very rude guest. You are a very weak prince. I don't see what my physical prowess or lack of philosophy, Technoblade inserted, has to do with you being such a pissy bastard. Technoblade, Wilbur finished hotly. Wilbur, Faber said swiftly to face his oldest son. Cursing in front of your baby brother? I taught you better manners than that. I'm not a baby, Tommy protested. And what does piss? I think that's my cue to go, Technoblade interrupted, suddenly rising from his seat. To where? Faber asked. None of your business, actually, Technoblade replied, not flippantly or arrogantly, just stating a fact. Faber's grip tightened infinitesimally on his spoon. I think it is my business if you're living in my castle. Technoblade shrugged. Try and stop me, then. They stared each other down, the king and his visitor, red eyes on blue. A moment passed, then another. Father did not move. That's what I thought. Technoblade scoffed and then disappeared in a whirl of fur and scarlet silk. Wilbur glanced at Father, trying to gauge his reaction. Father had never seemed truly old, but in that moment it felt like Wilbur was watching him age 1,000 years per second. Who is he really? Wilbur asked before he could lose the nerve. Father blinked slowly as if coming out of a dream. An old friend, I told you. From when? He can't be that old of a friend. He's just a teenager. When did you meet him? Wilbur repeated. Father pursued and unpursued his lips like he was trying to swallow something rancid. Why does it matter, Wilbur? Because you look at him like you look at me. And I don't know what to make of that. Father's gaze pinned Wilbur to his seat even more than the soreness of his body did. Even Tommy had fallen quiet, sensing in the way that younger siblings do that his brother was in the sort of trouble that required absolute silence. And how do I look at you, Will? Father asked. Like I disappoint you, like I did something to hurt you, and you're sad. I can't remember what. It doesn't matter, Wilbur mustered what was left of his strength and rose from his seat. My other non-violent tutors are waiting, if you'll excuse me, Father, Tommy. Tommy stared back at him wide-eyed. Father only sighed. It's a long story. Wilbur, he said with an infinite patience. Wilbur would have preferred he screamed. And not one you're ready to hear, either of you, he added, giving Tommy a reassuring smile. But one day I'll... Sure, Wilbur turned from them and began to walk away. One day, whenever that is. He expected a rebuttal, mutual, or perhaps wanted one, but, as always, there was nothing left to say. They carried on like that for months more. Every morning, Wilbur would pull himself out of bed and head down to the garden, where Technoblade would always be waiting, even after the times he threatened to leave, and the times that he looked like he was truly going to. Technoblade would walk Wilbur through his stances and correct them by demonstrating how exactly it could be turned against him. The tutor was never fully pleased, but eventually they made their way through the weapons in the chest and had to request for more to practice with, spears and knives and axes. They never spoke beyond the usual instructions, and Wilbur never complained again when, a few weeks in, he almost disarmed Technoblade during a sparring session with the rapier before Technoblade inevitably knocked him over again. I almost got you, Wilbur had grinned, even as he picked himself up from the floor. Almost won't cut it on the battlefield, princeling. Technoblade said with a roll of his eyes, and I was going easy on you. Whatever helps you sleep at night. Technoblade snorted. I don't sleep. Wilbur was still debating whether he'd been joking or not. Eventually, Tommy's jealousy overweighted his drowsiness, and he began to follow Wilbur to the training pavilion, yawning all the way with his blanket wrapped around his shoulder, and trailing in dewy grass. He'd sit on the floor, shouting unhelpful advice and laughing at his brother's failures. Technoblade, the younger prince had said at one point, will you trade me alongside Wilbur? Technoblade had eyed Tommy and his blanket, looking so serious that Wilbur thought he might actually be sizing his little brother up. Well, do you have similar skill levels? Hey! Wilbur tossed a stray pebble at Technoblade's head and bounced harmlessly off his braided hair. I want to be strong like you, Tommy said, uncharacteristically solemn, as he stared up at the older boys. And like Dad. He raised his gangly arms up to them. Look at these, Technoblade. They're pulsing with potential. Technoblade arched an eyebrow at him and a mute smile tugging at his lips. Little Prince, you are years away yet from needing to learn anything. Your brother's training, so you don't have to. Understood? Tommy pouted, but nodded. Wilbur stared at him, feeling as if he just witnessed the taming of a wild beast. He glanced at Technoblade, who had walked over to one corner of the pavilion to stretch. How you get Tommy not to kick and scream like he always does when he doesn't get what he wants from me? Wilbur called out. I don't kick and scream, Tommy huffed. I let out a manly whine. Probably because he respects me and not you, Technoblade replied curtly. Wilbur whirled at his brother. Is that true? He demanded, with fox hurt. Tommy shrugged. I respect you more if you weren't reading all the time. I'm not reading now, Wilbur said. At the same time, Technoblade called. I know how to read, too. Just to put it out there. Afterwards, they would eat breakfast together. Sometimes it would just be Wilbur, Technoblade, and Tommy going over the practice section. Technoblade with his dry corrections and Tommy with his enthusiastic, oblique, often inaccurate input. But often Phil's father would join them. And Wilbur would be lying if he said he didn't feel a bit validated whenever Technoblade praised, or as close as the man could get to praise his improvement in front of his father. Mother had taken to waking late and took her breakfast to her room. They'd visit her there. Wilbur, Tommy, but she'd often be too tired to speak at all. Tommy tried to introduce Technoblade to her once, but she was already asleep again. By the time they arrived at her bedchambers, probably for the best, Technoblade had said, I've been told I don't make great first impressions with mothers. Mostly because I met them after I slaughtered their children. Please reserve the morbid jokes. After Tommy's gone to bed, Technoblade Wilbur said. What does slaughter mean? Tommy asked. I tickled them, Technoblade said. Oh, to death. Oh! Wilbur had hit Technoblade on the shoulder, but he was laughing too. 3 months in, Technoblade finally relented to letting Wilbur practice long-ranged weapons, which turned out not to be his forte after all. The session had to stop after Wilbur almost took Tommy's eye out with an arrow. Tommy was inconsolable. Please don't tell Father, Wilbur begged as he kneeled in front of his wailing brother, wiping Tommy's cheeks as fast as the tears came. It was an accident, Tommy. Technoblade was cackling, leaning against one of the pavilion's sculpted pillars. You should see your face, he managed to wheeze out between his coughs. Oh, gods. This is too hilarious. Wilbur turned to glare at him. Do you know if he tells Father that means you're in trouble too? Technoblade snorted. I'm not scared of your father. There it was again, the arrogant dismissal of as if Father were nothing to him. Father clenched his jaw. Wilbur clenched his jaw to keep the barbed remarks from spilling. Tommy was still waiting, his tiny face turned red from the effort. Okay, Technoblade said after a long moment. That's getting annoying now, stop. Tommy didn't. Tommy, stop, Technoblade said more loudly. Tommy stopped, only to wipe his nose on his sleeve, hiccup, and then wail again. What's wrong with him? That usually works, Technoblade grumbled, stalking closer to them with the caution of a hunter approaching a wild animal. Welcome to the world of Big Brotherhood, Wilbur replied bitterly, still wiping gently at Tommy's face. We hope you enjoy your stay, but most likely you will suffer. Technoblade came to kneel beside Wilbur. Tommy, Technoblade demanded. That is very irritating. What are you doing? Please quiet down. Tommy responded by crying louder. Oh, for the love of. What will it take for you to shut up? I'll do anything at this point. The crying stopped immediately. Oh, God. Wilbur put his face in his hands. You're not supposed to say that, Techno. You're never supposed to say that. What? Technoblade demanded, panic seeping into his voice for the first time since Wilbur met him. What did I do? What the hell did I do? Tommy sniffled. You said you'll do anything? Realization dawned on Technoblade's face. Well, not anything per se. Tommy's eyes began to water once more. Okay. Technoblade ran his hands across his face in frustration. Fine, one thing, and you'll shut up forever. I want to braid your hair, Tommy said at once. Technoblade blinked. What? Wilbur echoed. You once got me to let you ride me like a pony across the castle, and you asked him to let you braid his hair? Tommy nodded with a solemnity of a judge announcing someone's death. Sentence. Wilbur and Technoblade exchanged glances. Technoblade, one of bewilderment, and Wilbur, one of utmost betrayal. That was how they found themselves wasting the morning away, sitting together on the damp grass. Wilbur leaned back on his hands and raised his face to the sun, letting the light settle against his skin. He could hear Tommy scurrying around, gathering flowers as the spring blew through the garden. For a moment, all Wilbur could feel was a sudden, all-consuming affection, not for anything in particular, for everything, for the brilliant spinning wheel in the sky, turning everything into burnished gold, for the soft dirt beneath his hands, for the air in his lungs, and the pollen on his tongue, for the distant sound of his brother's footsteps, for the boy sitting beside him, that, against all odds, Wilbur found he might actually like, beyond mere tolerance, for the levity that had stared to chase away the more exhausting thoughts. He cracked one eye open and found Technoblade staring at him again, with that all-too-serious look. What? Wilbur asked. Can a man be glad that he's not getting tossed around for one morning? Technoblade scoffed. Don't discredit my teaching skills like that. You've been getting tossed around less and less these days. Was that meant to be a compliment? None of my compliments will ever be meant. They will be passive-aggressive at best, openly hostile at worst. Oh, of course, we have to pry positive affirmation from your cold, dead hands. Is that it? Only way you'll earn it, Technoblade confirmed. They went silent as another breeze blew past them, blowing Technoblade's unbound hair across his face. Then, before Wilbur could think twice about it, he said, What did you mean before when you told Father our tutoring sessions were a distraction? A distraction from what? Technoblade's expression darkened for a fraction of a second before he schooled it into careful neutrality. He shrugged nonchalantly. Well, growing boy like you're meant to have hobbies beyond whatever you were doing before. I read, Wilbur said. I play music. That was sufficient distraction, I think. Not according to Philza. Why do you talk like that? By the way, Wilbur shifted to look at Technoblade squarely in the eyes. Why, you call the king Philza, which I can excuse because you're, you, but Father also calls you an old friend, and I've asked Mother, because father tells mother everything, but she never heard of you before. And all these things about weapons, and warfare far too much. You're a kingdom that has enjoyed peace for decades, princeling, Technoblade said, with a world's worth of exhaustion in his voice. Beyond these walls, it's different. Knowing war young is not entirely uncommon. Kids just grow faster out there. They have to. Wilbur took fistfuls of grass and threw it at Technoblade's face. Technoblade, amused, simply blew the grass from his face. Very mature, Your Highness, Technoblade said dryly. You were being all sad again, Wilbur muttered, pulling his knees up to his chin. He looked up just as Tommy came toddling towards them. His arms a burst of color, yellow astrolames, white daisies, purple mallows, and friases of color. Friases, the color of Technoblade's hair. Oh gods, Technoblade groaned as Tommy dumped his collection before them proudly. Tommy grinned as he kneeled behind Technoblade. Dad used to braid Mama's hair all the time before she got tired. He taught me how. Technoblade turned towards Wilbur. Should I be worried? Very. Wilbur said sagely. At least he doesn't have scissors this time, he added, recalling a particularly incensed butler who'd foolishly offered himself to be Tommy's training dummy last year and ended up with less hair than he bargained for. Tommy turned Technoblade's head away from Wilbur. Hold still, he ordered, beginning to take handfuls of Technoblade's hair, tugging them into place. Ow! Technoblade said after a particularly harsh pull. Sorry, Tommy said cheerfully and began to braid in earnest. Wilbur sat back and watched them in silence, his ferocious tutor and his more ferocious younger brother. The sunlight seemed to catch in the tangles of Tommy's hair, making it shine like a golden halo. Wilbur had never seen anyone as focused as Tommy was in that moment, working for Technoblade's hair, pausing only to debate on what flowers should go where. And Technoblade, for his part, did not move at all, or let out so much as a word of complaint, even when Tommy took time to educate them all on what exactly each flower meant. I could write a song about this, Wilbur mused, and then marveled at thought. It was as if a block he'd been carrying for years lifted, and his art was now inches away from his hand. If only he'd brought his guitar with him today. Tomorrow, he promised himself, I'll write another song tomorrow. There, Tommy said at last, tying the end of the braid with the red ribbon Technoblade often used himself. Wilbur blinked in surprise. Tommy, that's actually good, really good. Technoblade reached back and ran his hands delicately over the elegant braid and the flowers woven into it. He hummed appreciatively, then caught himself before he could fully smile, because he was still Technoblade after all. Decent was his only comment. I'm not done yet, Tommy said, and produced one more flower, a single yellow rose. This one's my favorite, he added as he gently tucked the flower behind Technoblade's ear, the one that had the emerald earring that Wilbur had found so familiar, because it means friendship. Technoblade stiffened, his mouth opened and closed like he was trying to breathe, but forgot how, before he finally said, Are we friends then? Tommy stood and brushed the grass off his pants. Well, obviously. Oh, hey! The sudden excitement in Tommy's tone caught both Technoblade and Wilbur's attention. He began waving to someone in the distance, his smile as bright as life itself. It's Dad! And Mama! Mother? Wilbur was on his feet at once, his heart hammering in his chest. like a moth set aflame. Sure enough, there was Mother, out in the sun once more. For the first time in over a year, Wilbur took a shaky inhale, but not daring to breathe again, as if the image before him would dissipate like smoke. Mother smiling at them as she walked arm in arm with Father through the garden. Tommy ran as fast as his tiny legs could carry him, and launched himself into their mother's waiting arms. Wilbur couldn't ignore the brief flash of pain that flickered over his mother's features as she gathered Tommy into hug. But neither could help all his relief at seeing her walk at all. Well, Technoblade said from behind him, go ahead then. Wilbur turned to his tutor, and before Technoblade could protest, took him by the wrist and dragged him over to where Mother and Father were waiting. Father's smile was gentle and welcoming, and Wilbur could almost forgive the sadness that remained in his eyes, like a ghost hovering at the edge of a celebration. You must be Technoblade, Mother said happily, carrying Tommy in her arms as she addressed the tutor. I do apologize that it has taken us this long to be acquainted, though Phil has been telling me of all you have done for our Wilby. Wilbur expected Technoblade's usual icy jabs, and was quite surprised when he bowed his head in what could pass as deference in untrained eye. It is a pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty. Your sons have told me much about you. Mother gave Technoblade a conspirational grin as she asked, and I trust all they've said is in my favor? Yes, nothing about how sharp my tongue can be when I'm cranky. Oh, I assure you, they've painted you as nothing less than perfect. Technoblade glanced at Father, although Philza might have said a thing about your rigid standards for tea. Father chuckled. He pressed closer to Mother and Tommy, keeping an arm around Mother's waist, as if to steady her, as if to hold her together just a bit longer. I told you that in confidence, Technoblade, Mother repeated. That's a rather odd name. I said the same thing, Tommy added brightly, always eager to be a part of the adults' conversation. Technoblade only shrugged once again, demonstrating the level of civility that Wilbur would never have expected of the same man who regularly combated the king's orders. I would feel too much like a traitor to abandon it now after all these years with it. It's my most constant companion, more loyal than most. Loyalty is a rather precious gift, Mother said softly. She transferred Tommy to one arm and reached out with the other until she was cupping Technoblade's cheek. I do hope, my boy, she continued, her voice tranquil as a still lake, that you will find the people you can trust more than your own name. You deserve that, and more for all you have done for my family. Technoblade blinked slowly at her, for once struck speechless. Tommy giggled. Techno is blushing. I am not, Technoblade spat hotly. Yes, you are, Tommy cooed, leaning back into Mother's arms, safe in the belief that she would never drop in. You so are. Tommy, don't torture the poor child, Mother said, even as she giggled herself. Will, Father reached out and ruffled Wilbur's hair playfully. You look 100 miles away. Wilbur exhaled slowly. I'm just remembering. Remembering what? This mother. Soft smile, Tommy's cheery laugh, Technoblade's half-hearted protest, Father's hand on his head. Everything. Nothing, Wilbur said. Forget it. Forget I said anything. He smiled at his father for once. Without reservation, he had never felt so light. He was almost a son again. Would you like to watch Techno and I spar? Father expression softened. Of course, I would be delighted to. It was the last good day. A knock came at midnight. It dragged Wilbur from comfort and of a dreamless sleep. Wilbur, Technoblade's voice urgent, almost angry. Wilbur, open the door. Wilbur threw off his covers and bolted for the door. Technoblade stood outside his bedchambers, his red eyes blazing in the dark. He said 3 words that would come to haunt Wilbur until the day he died. It's your mother. They ran through the castle, Wilbur, for the first time, outpacing his tutor. They arrived at the long hallway that led to his parents' bedchambers, already choked with servants. Move, Technoblade demanded, his voice booming over the din. Move, or I will make you. Servants rushed to the sides, clearing a path for Wilbur and Technoblade. Wilbur couldn't register any of their faces or their voices. All there was silence until the worst sound Wilbur had ever heard, an anguish cry that turned Wilbur's blood cold. Tommy's here. He burst into the room and found his brother curled into a ball by the foot of the bed where his mother lay sleeping. No, not sleeping. Wilbur could not breathe. Tommy was still crying for their mother, for their father. Wilbur scanned the room, but there was no trace of the king, no trace of the man who just lost his wife. Tommy, Technoblade pushed past Wilbur and into the room. Wilbur could see it all, but it felt like watching someone else's life happen from lieges under the sea. Everything happened too slowly, too distantly. Technoblade kneeling by his brother, prying him off the cold floor. Tommy wrapping his arms around Technoblade's neck, burying his head into his shoulder and screaming, so loud, too loud. Technoblade turning towards Wilbur, handing him something, pressing it into Wilbur's cold fingers. Wilbur looked down at his hand. It was a letter, crumpled, tear-stained by his own tears, he realized beatedly. Techno. It said, tell the boys I'm sorry, and tell Wilbur he will be a better king than I ever was. The world fell out from under Wilbur's feet, leaving him suspended in the air, free-falling, with no true end. No, he thought, or maybe said, or maybe screamed, no, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. Oh, said the voices, but this already happened before. Wilbur blinked and blinked again. Father's gone? He said, not taking his eyes off the letter. He left? Wilbur, Technoblade's voice rising above Tommy's agonized sobbing. Was that worry in the other boy's voice? I found the letter slipped under my door, and by the time I came here, it was too late. Your mother, she was also gone. The letter began to shake violently, or not the letter, Wilbur's hands, but she was just here this morning. She watched us spar. She was smiling. She was alive. Technoblade. Techno. This was inevitable. Wilbur clamped his hands over his ear. Shut up! It was meant to be. Go away! Wilbur fell to his knees, pressing his hands tighter and tighter to block out the sound. I thought I'd gotten rid of you. You said you were going to leave me alone. A sudden pain laced up Wilbur's arm. He opened his eyes to find Technoblade kneeling in front of him, his hand an iron grip around Wilbur's wrist. Tommy was gone. When did that happen? And the silence was left behind was almost as bad as the screaming. Come back to me, Wilbur, Technoblade ordered. Who do you hear? You, Wilbur said haltingly. He was not for this act, not for this stage. And the voices. Technoblade nodded, easing the grip on Wilbur's wrist. I can help you. No one can. Wilbur squeezed his eyes shut, but all he could see was Mother's still form, Father's letter. Wilbur, look at me. Wilbur shook his head. I can't. Then listen to me. I can help you, Technoblade repeated firmly, because I have voices too. Wilbur's lung began to ache with the quickness of his breath. You do? He sounded like a child seeking comfort from a distant figure, but there was too much pain to make room for shame. I do, Technoblade said. So breathe with me until they go away, and we can figure out the next step together. That was all they did. They breathed in and out, and in again. Technoblade's hand on his wrist, and sickly sweet smell of rotting flowers kept him rooted to the ground, to the universe. In and out, and in again. And in between one breath and the next, Wilbur finally remembered where he'd heard the name Technoblade before. Father, Wilbur swallowed down a sob. He told me a story once when I was young. For the first time the voices ever talked to me. He told me a story about an immortal god who's doomed to hear voices in his head forever. A blood god, Technoblade. You're a god? Don't worry about that now. His voice was distant, but kind. It doesn't matter. But I don't remember how the story ended. Exhaustion was a heavy blanket, weighed him down until he was leaning on Technoblade's shoulder. His throat felt raw, like he'd eaten broken glass. This story has no end, the voices said, but they sounded distant too. Tell me how the story ends, Wilbur begged, even as he felt the last of his consciousness slowly fracture into nothingness. Tell me you'll still be here when I close the book. Wilbur, Technoblade mumbled something too low to hear, and then he said, okay, I'll be here. Wilbur wanted to say more, or perhaps he didn't. Outside, somewhere far away, bells rang to toll, chiming his mother's death ballad, hurtling her ascension. Tell the boys I'm sorry, his father's voice, this time as quiet as the rest. In between one breath and the next, Wilbur was king. In between one breath and the next, he was asleep.